Hi guys, welcome back to yet another instalment of my constant reader journey. Getting quite a collection. Through the complete works of Stephen King. This time I'm taking a look at what is maybe Stephen King's darkest story. I mean, it's certainly up there. At Pupil. I'll be getting into my thoughts, my feelings on the story itself. I'm also going to be getting into the 1998 film adaptation. Didn't really enjoy it, but still talk about it. If you enjoy this video, remember to like, comment, subscribe, all of that. I've got quite a few more Stephen King stories to work my way through. And you'll be the first to know when I'm talking about the next one. Alright, so Apt Pupil. Never heard of it before, went into this blind. Lots of people I know have big things to say about it, so it's like, oh, okay, give it a go. It's the second novella in the Different Seasons book. We are fresh off spring. Spring has sprung in the Shawshank Redemption. Now it's time for the summer of corruption. And this was such a hard left from Shawshank. Because while Shawshank is bleak, there's at least an underlying sense of optimism. Like, you trust things will get better. But in Apt Pupil, it's the opposite. It's not going to get better. It gets worse. And you don't expect it to get worse, and then it does. Which I found quite refreshing, to be completely honest, because I'm tired of redemption arcs. I'm over heroes and villains. Like, just because reading is escapism, that doesn't mean we can't have realistic stories about pure evil from time to time. And I think that's what makes this story so great. It's completely unfiltered. It's so raw. You feel like you're reading something illegal. Like they would ban this from schools. Apparently, King wrote Apt Pupil in just 2 weeks, fresh off the buzz of completing The Shining. Some fans have also speculated that there's like parallels between the two stories. I haven't read The Shining, so I can't comment on that. I'll get there one day. But I do think this is an underrated dark gem. Like, it's so unlike anything else that I've read from him. At some point, I thought like he must have been possessed by the spirit of Dostoevsky, because it feels very reminiscent of something he would write, which is crazy because like they're almost a century apart. Our main characters are horrible people. The social commentary, biting. There's a palpable sense of dread. You want to put this book down, and yet there's a morbid curiosity that sort of encourages you to turn the next page, even though the story you're being told is so upsetting. So it starts, Todd Bowden, an all-American boy growing up in suburban California. He does a paper round and he knocks on the door of an old man. This old man is pretending to be an Arthur Denker when his real name is actually Kurt Desander. He is a German immigrant. Todd asks if he can come in, and very boldly, for a 13-year-old, puts all his cards on the table, confronts Desander. He says, I know your real identity. You're a former SS officer who worked at the concentration camps and evaded capture after the war. And this is really where the story takes a turn, because you're expecting Todd, a literal child, to be a precocious vigilante, like, oh, he's going to report Desander to the police and carry on his life, as you do. No, that doesn't happen at all. Todd has taken a very keen interest in Hitler's final solution and Nazi Germany in general. He blackmails Desander into telling him in vivid detail about the atrocities of the gas chambers, seemingly getting a kick out of imagining mass genocide. Like, it's a lot. It was very reminiscent, to me at least, of Sinclair Lewis. Sinclair Lewis was another writer who won the Pulitzer Prize for the way that he sort of dismantled the false utopia of white picket fence America. Because at this point, this story is set in like the late 70s, early 80s. The USA's won 2 world wars. It's on its way to becoming a global superpower. And so stories like this really challenge the mindset of American exceptionalism. It's easy for people in like easygoing suburban peaceful America to look down on the Nazis as savages, but see how easily that same brutality has sort of crept into the minds of little America. Like, Todd had a privileged upbringing, good health, every possible advantage, but he still falls into extremism and debauchery. And he wasn't even radicalised. It's not a case of DeSander finding him. He went out and found DeSander, hoping to victimise this serial killer. It's much like Frankenstein in that this story has so much to say about the philosophy of evil and how if it can happen here, it can happen anywhere. There's no difference between Nazi Germany and suburban American neighbourhood. We're all people. DeSander is quick to point out how the USA have used bombs in their history. They've killed millions, atom bombs, napalm, Agent Orange. Even dogs at the animal shelter are gassed if they can't find a home for them. Is America in any position to take the moral high ground? And yeah, Stephen King, very politically minded, has a point. But I digress. Todd has photographs and fingerprints of DeSander. He also lies and claims that he has left a note with a friend in case something should happen to Todd while he's at DeSander's house. And so backed into a corner, DeSander relates all the ways in which they killed people at the concentration camps, the Nuremberg trials, how people were tortured, how people were experimented on. He mentions how once he immigrated to America, his investments were actually handled by a banker named Andy Dufresne, which I surprisingly didn't appreciate, this tie-in to Shawshank, because DeSander is so despicable that it now shades my perception of Dufresne, knowing that they did business together. I feel like I can't go back and read Shawshank now without mentally picturing that, like it's tainted. Because Todd is so captivated by DeSander, he visits him often. He even saves up enough money to buy him a Halloween SS costume and gets him to recreate his Nazi march around the house.
What's so funny? March. Do it. I'm serious. Stop fucking around. March.
It's wild. Todd starts having nightmares about all the horrors that he's learned about from DeSander. They also seem to form his sexual awakening. Like, his first wet dream involves him, penetrating a Jewish girl with a steel dildo. Truly there's no place that this novel does not go. We see how his love for violence translates into a sexual fetish. By the time he's about 16 years old, he starts to date Becky and they have a very tumultuous relationship. Now, since Todd was such a apt pupil, consistently scoring A's and B's across all his subjects, his parents have enough willful ignorance that he gets up to all of this Nazi worship right under their noses. It's only when his grades start to slip, especially on his algebra, that his parents start asking questions. Todd struggles with maths throughout the story, which felt like black irony, because in Hitler's Nazi rule, he decimated mathematics throughout Germany because the field had so many Jewish professors. And so it's as if the spirit of maths has a personal vendetta. It's a clever tie-in to the Jews and the pushback against Todd. But Todd covers up most of his grades with ink eradicator. DeSander even pretends to be Todd's grandfather to stage a meeting with his guidance counsellor, Edward French. He'll come up later. Several months pass. DeSander comes over to the Bowden household for a dinner. He's made it clear to Todd that while he might have killed people at the death camps, for months now, Todd has helped conceal his identity. Todd is now complicit in harbouring a fugitive. And so DeSander makes it clear, you are now in this as much as I am. Should anything happen to me, I've written a letter that explains all of this, and it's in a safety deposit box. It will incriminate you, it will ruin your life. Again, much like Todd's letter, we find out it's fictitious, he just made it up, but it serves as a strong enough impetus that allows Todd to sort of spiral further into corruption, because he doesn't really have anything to live for. He feels like he's on borrowed time. So, in their time away from each other, both DeSander and Todd commit several murders. They target the sort of homeless, alcoholic deadbeats because nobody will really care if they go missing. Todd kills most of his by the train yard, but DeSander, he's much worse. He has the nerve to invite them back to his house on the pretense of sex work, only to then butcher them and bury them in his basement. It gets very Edgar Allan Poe. While DeSander is burying his latest victim, he overexerts himself and suffers a heart attack, and he has to call Todd up in an emergency to clean up all the blood and finish disposing of the body. There's like a drama with a letter as an alibi. It's a whole thing. Todd is only, at this point, like 14, 15, but he stays very calm. DeSander can tell he's killed people himself because he doesn't, seize up when he sees all the gore. The problem that DeSander encounters when he gets to the hospital is that Holocaust survivors are everywhere. When you hurt that many people and affect that many people's lives in such a way that they're not going to forget your face, Morris Heisel, who fell off a ladder and is recovering in the hospital bed opposite DeSander, it takes him a couple days, but once he recognises that DeSander was the SS officer that killed his wife and children at Patan, he's very distressed. He alerts the authorities. DeSander tries to wriggle out of the detective's questions, but it becomes very clear he's an illegal immigrant. There's photographic evidence of him as an SS officer. So he sneaks into the nurse's office, he grabs a load of Seconal sleeping pills and overdoses. And that was effective because often in real life, bad people do get away with their crimes and don't come to justice. Instead, he's almost sort of committed his crimes twice over because now that same corruption has sort of permeated into Todd as well. So Todd's guidance counsellor, Edward, he confronts him at his house. He's discovered in his own time that DeSander was a former Nazi, pretending to be his grandfather, and that Todd has changed his grades with ink eradicator. Todd, realising that the detectives are going to figure him out soon, he shoots Edward to death, like right in this open neighbourhood space, and then realising, he's in blood, he just goes on a rampage with the gun until he's also taken out by police, and our apt pupil is dead. Story's over. There is a 1998 Bryan Singer adaptation of Apt Pupil, and without mincing my words, it's a massive disappointment. Because this story's so dark and has such an edge, I wanted like a Nazi version of American Beauty, but instead we sort of got like a Lifetime movie with a budget. It really misses the mark. Admittedly, I do think this story has such a way about it that I think it's unfilmable. Like, if you want to do the book justice, our two main characters celebrate one of the most terrible genocides in human history. I can't see that ever getting an authentic on-screen adaptation because it's so much. Still, all the dialogue between DeSander and Todd in the book feels bastardized and low effort in the film. Like, it felt rushed. We were sort of going through the motions. Most of the film really should have taken place in the house between just the two of them. But no, surprisingly, a lot of it happens at the school for some reason. The battle of wills between them felt oversimplified. Like, I wanted a gripping cat and mouse thriller, but no, it was just talking. A lot of the scenes, they're just talking. There's no edge. There's no feeling of intensity. It's just talking. I also don't think that Todd Bowden's character was adapted well. I almost feel like they didn't understand him. Like, in so many scenes, he has this vacant, almost sociopathic expression. But to me, at least, that's not Todd. He should have had, like, a big crocodile grin. Like, Todd isn't a weirdo. The whole point of his character, to the general audience, he seems like an everyday, confident, charming teenage boy. He's not awkward. He's, like, a cold-blooded sadist. But I think they were afraid to go too deep with that kind of persona, particularly with such a young actor. They also decided to give him a best friend called Joey, which made no sense to me. Like, he's meant to be a loner. Sure, he has friends to keep up appearances, but DeSander is the only person he's meant to relate to. We really didn't need Joey. Speaking of DeSander, Sir Ian McKellen, are we surprised? He was great.
Face right. March. March. Okay, that's enough. Stop. Stop it!
You could tell he was the only one who appreciated what kind of story this was meant to be. Everyone else was so reined in. He was the only one who was doing enough, it felt. It reminded me somewhat of Donald Sutherland in the 2004 Salem's Lot. How everyone was sort of just there and he was owning Straker. It's an interesting departure as well because Ian is so lovely in real life. Like, watching him play this wicked monster, it only adds to how unsettling he makes you feel and, like, how committed he is to selling a role, because it's just so different to what you would expect him to be like. So many scenes were taken from the book, but they were made, like, impotent by not delivering on the violence. Like, in the book, DeSander, when he's on the bloodlust, he puts a cat in the oven and cooks it alive, and it's horrifying. But in the film, the cat scratches him and manages to escape.
Kitty, kitty. Kitty, kitty. Goodbye.
And by doing that, the brutality of that moment is lost. The intent itself is not strong enough. They ruined what could have been a traumatizing scene. And similarly, Todd, in the book, he kills a bird, and it's impactful because it's the first thing that he ever kills, and he runs it over with his bike, and even after it's already dead, he keeps wheeling back over it, further desecrating its body. But in the film, he just drops his basketball on its head. He does it once and calls it a day. It was such a step down, because you imagine these moments, when you're reading the book, you imagine these moments playing out in your head, and they're chilling because it's so vividly described to you. And then in the film, it's like, I did enjoy, there's a scene where Todd has left the gym and he's in the communal showers and he suddenly pictures himself in the concentration camp showers with DeSander. I thought that was a clever piece of surrealism that added to the original story. But it was rare that I enjoyed scenes like that. For the most part, this movie was a complete slog. Much like my Tommyknockers review, 90s movies seem to love an aggressive score that swallows the whole scene up. Like, you couldn't pay attention to what was happening at some points because the sound design was like chewing your ears off. You were like, ah! Like the scene where DeSander is explaining the safety deposit box and Todd contemplates pushing him down the stairs of the basement, it's done in such an amateur way that you feel absolutely nothing. Whereas in the book, you appreciate it so much more. It's such a chilling, like, escalation. You really think, is he going to do it? Is he going to kill DeSander? And in this, it was just... DeSander invites a wino over and is standing over him with a knife. And there's like a hot minute where it's tense. And then he just sticks it in his back while opera music plays. And it was just so stupid. It's like, this is bad. This is really bad. In this version as well, they kept trying to redeem Todd's character. Like, DeSander locks him in the basement so that he can't, like, get involved. And even though, like, in the book he's far from redeemable, we never see, like, any serial killing. Like, they really wanted to give us a Hollywood triumph over evil plot, but it completely abandons all the nuance of the story. There's no serial killing in this version. They kill one guy, and so it makes Edward French's character redundant, played by David Schwimmer. He appears in like less than 5 minutes of this 2-hour film. We don't even see his personal investigation into Todd's grade forgery, and when he finally does confront Todd, Todd doesn't even kill him. He just threatens to accuse him of paedophilia.
The things I'm gonna say, they'll never go away. Not for you. Think of your job. Think of your son.
Clear.
It's so lame. There was nothing previously to suggest that that would be like a likely course of action. Like, Todd is rotten to the core. He should be killing him. Like, what happened? DeSander kills himself by pulling out his, like, IV drip. Unlike in the book where he uses a bottle of Seconals, it's more effective when it's death by pills, because I think it's supposed to mirror how Hitler's suicide was via a cyanide pill, while this was just meaningless convenience. It was like, oh, I'll just pull his drip out and he's dead. I'm somewhat surprised that I made it through the whole film, because it wasn't entertaining. It was a huge letdown. When you take into account how brilliant this book was, I can't say I'm surprised that this film made a loss at the box office. I think they had like a 14 mil budget and only made like 9 mil. We don't need to adapt every single good story that King writes. Some of the more provocative ones are better off left alone, because this adaptation, it was like the definition of fitting a square peg into a round hole. It just didn't work. They tried to change fundamentally what makes this story work. Having said that, I don't want my ranting about the film to take anything away from how brilliant the book itself is. Diatribe over. From what I've seen from other constant readers, it's the sort of story that never really leaves you. It's so haunting, especially when it's not very famous, so you take it for granted. You don't realise what you've quite got yourself into. I can't recommend At Pupil enough. Please, just go read it. Don't watch the film. Maybe go on YouTube and look up some of Ian's scenes, because he is great. But, you know, other than that, go read At Pupil. Thank you for watching, and as always, toodaloo.